Hello and welcome back to another update. In this one, we'll be covering the continuous fighting in the Ukrainian offensive. Starting out, we have some territorial changes here to the south of Marinka, where the Russian forces have continued advancing after a couple of days back when they captured parts of the fields south of Marinka. They've now continued their attacks and are capturing further parts of this part of the front line. And then we have some changes here by the Zaporizhzhia front as well, where the Russian forces have started counterattacking in this part of the front line. So they've managed to recapture some parts that the Ukrainian forces managed to capture a couple of days to a week back. And the Ukrainian forces have continuously been pushing in this area, which is why we see multiple parts of their advances. And now the Russians are trying to counterattack a bit. So this is very interesting because it seems that the pressure that the Ukrainians have been exerting on this part of the front line must have relieved a bit for the Russians to be doing any counterattacks. At the same time, we see that the area here to the south of Novodanilivka is filled with open fields. So it is very difficult for anyone to advance in this part of the front line, as they would just be sitting ducks for all of the artillery, and especially on the Russian side where they also have the helicopters as well as the Air Force. As we see in these videos here, there's two videos of Russian Ka-52 helicopters and one of a jet plane flying by. And all of these videos have one thing in common, and that is that the Ukrainians cannot match this output, as the Russian forces just have that much more, and they have the ability to shoot down the Ukrainian parts easily, while the Ukrainians cannot hit the Russian helicopters and planes 10 kilometers behind the front line. So essentially, in this part where the Ukrainians are on the offensive and the Russian forces are the ones being on the defensive, the Russians have a significant advantage with their air force, especially here on the northern parts next to Velika Novosilka and the Donetsk region, where the Ukrainian forces had continuously advanced, especially here on the eastern parts of the river line, trying to capture these fields. The Russian forces have continuously attacked with their Ka-52 helicopters to destroy the armored vehicles being used to advance in this part of the front line. And in connection with this, we actually see this video here, which is a video of Ukrainian soldiers that seems to advance in a field into some trenches without any resistance of Russian forces. This development is very interesting, especially since we do not know where this was filmed. However, if we consider it to be part of the front line, then the Russians most likely have withdrawn from that position, which could indicate that they are either trying to lure the Ukrainians back into the front line and further deep into the positions so that they can be ambushed, or that they are simply too overstretched and have to consolidate their forces and withdraw to put other positions behind the lines and try to attack the Ukrainians from those positions, as they would most likely be in a position there that is beneficial to them compared to on the front line in these trenches where the Ukrainians may have overwhelming strength. In other news about the village here of Pyatykhatky, according to the latest news by Deep State Map, they showed a picture of Ukrainian soldiers taking a picture with a flag here in the center of the village, which indicates that the Ukrainians have control over it. However, according to the latest news by Vonkori, the 19th Division countered and took the enemy in a semicircle, the armed forces of Ukraine free from Pyatykhatky. So Pyatykhatky seems to be changing hands every so often, every couple of hours. As the Ukrainians advance, they take control of the village, the Russians bombard them and counterattack, and then the Ukrainians launch artillery and counterattack, and it continues in this cycle as both sides continuously bombard the village, which essentially now is non-existent, and the Russian forces continuously try to prevent them from advancing further from this position, as this is actually located in a ledge. So on each side of this area there's higher ground to the southwest in the direction of Pyatykhatky, and in the northern parts there's also the high ground, which means that this is located in a valley. So the Russian positions here to the south in the village of Pyatykhatky are at an advantage geographically when it comes to fighting the Ukrainians within the village, and if they advance within it, then the Russians would have the disadvantage and the Ukrainians would have the advantage by attack from the high ground. So essentially whoever holds this village is at a disadvantage based on geography, which is why we have seen the Ukrainians being hesitant about taking the village and actually entering it, as ever since they got bombarded there, they have essentially kept out of it. They have taken the photo for the PR operations, but other than that, they have essentially stayed clear of the village, and whoever has control over the village is essentially just left alone. It's a gray zone rather than under Ukrainian control. However, considering Deep State Map reporting it as under Ukrainian control and selfie in it, then I might as well leave it under the Ukrainian control. Now, some interesting news is coming from the Luhansk front. According to the latest news, the Russian forces actually started attacking on this part of the front line. First off, they have some attacks here to the north in the direction of Kupiansk, as they try to expand the zone of control east of the Oska River line and attack in the direction of Kupiansk. They've also attacked west of Svatove in the direction of Selmahivka, as well as other villages west of Svatove. And finally, they've also started attacks in the direction of Torske, here to the west of Kremenna. So the Russian forces are here attempting to restart and draw Ukrainian troops from the Zaporizhia front to this part of the front line. And at the same time, they may be trying to take advantage of the situation of the Ukrainian offensive to launch their own offensive here in the Luhansk front. As I've mentioned previously, in the Luhansk front, the Russian forces have a lot of units. We see the 4th Guards Tank Division as well as the 19th Tank Division and many more units here on the front line, the 144th Guards Motor Rifle Division. So tens of thousands of Russian soldiers, as well as hundreds of tanks and hundreds of armored vehicles, both infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers. So in this part of the front line, the Russian forces have a significant force, combined with it being so close to Russia itself, which allows for easy transportation of both supplies and materials and logistics. So generally, this part of the front line is the obvious part for the Russians to start an offensive in. We've seen that prior to the Kharkiv offensive, the Russian forces control huge chunks of territories, including Liman and Izium. And for the Russians to fully capture the Donetsk region, they have to go through the Sloviansk-Konstantinivka line. Going around it is clearly the obvious choice for a easier way to take control of it, rather than having to push through the heavy fortifications. And for that, they would need to recapture Liman and Izium again after the first capture at the start of the invasion. So essentially what we're looking at is a potential Russian offensive here by the north in the Luhansk front, while the Ukrainians are focusing their forces here in the south in the direction of Zaporizhia, in the direction of Orikhiv, Veliki and Vasilka. So this is a very interesting development, because we see that the Russian forces also have a lot of units here in the south, but these are mostly mechanized and infantry regiments and brigades and armies, in comparison to the northern part, where it's mainly mechanized and armored units, which are used for offensive purposes, and the infantry is used for defensive purposes. So it's a clear difference here in the type of operations that is the objective of the different units in the different areas, which could indicate the strategy the Russian forces have in mind. All in all, it seems that the situation is definitely not slowing down. The Ukrainian forces continue their attacks across the whole Zaporizhia front, attempting to advance in this part of the front line, as well as the Russians improving and increasing their efforts in other areas of the front line, including by Marinka, as well as in the northern part by the Luhansk front. And that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.